welcome everybody to the Application Runtime Interfaces Working Group update. My name is Stephan Merker. I work with SAP, and I am one of the execution leads of the working group, and I am a member of the Technical Oversight Committee since its foundation in 2021. Application Runtime Interfaces provides the APIs that you interact with as users of Cloud Foundry, and it provides the community clients. Workgroup leads are Greg Kopp and myself, and the working group is rather big. Roughly 60 approvers and 20 reviewers take care for 100 GitHub repositories. That's a lot. If we look a little bit inside, you see the different areas from a user's point of view. First of all, there is the CF-CLI and the Buildpacks that you are probably dealing most with. Below the CLI, there is the CF API, known as CAPI, Cloud API. Then there are language bindings for the CF API, Golang, Java, a Terraform provider. And there is Stratos, a UI for Cloud Foundry itself. And finally, the working group also contains some higher level services like the Autoscaler, MultiApps deployment service, and notifications functionality. Most of the areas work pretty well. The number of approvers and reviewers roughly stable. We deliver regularly. That's all nice. But there are two areas I want to point out here, especially GoTools and Buildpacks, which actually have trouble. For GoTools, you see there's just one approver left, so this repository is then pretty soon maybe orphaned, and if you are relying on it, a helping hand would be really appreciated. And even more important, Buildpacks, it looks healthy. 12 approvers, but 8 of them are soon leaving or have already left. So there's also a problem with enough contributors to the Buildpacks area. I will come back to this topic a little bit later and taking maybe some hope of all of you how good actually Cloud Foundry you think it is, or it is not. But first, we talk about new features. That's always more pleasurable. First thing is file-based service binding information. You all know that if you want to consume a database, you bind it to your application and you get the credentials via the vCAP services environment variable. So far, so good and well known. However, this provisioning or discovery mechanism has a limitation, and that's the famous 130K limitation for a single environment variable. That means when you bind many services, you may reach that. And even worse, many of the services changed their implementation recently and do not provide authentication anymore via username and password, but instead use MTLS and certificates, and they eat up a lot of more space. So suddenly, you can bind only 10 service instances and not more until you reach this limit. And therefore, we provide a new implementation that you can enable via a application feature flag. I showed it here in an example application manifest, file-based vCAP services true. And if you do that, then you get a new environment variable that points you to a file, and that file actually contains the service bindings. Now, there is also a limit, there's always a limit, but this limit is now 1 megabyte, so you have at least for the next 1-2 years more freedom to bind services using MTLS. But there's one thing more. If your application, let's say, is closer in the direction of Kubernetes, maybe you want to deploy it on CF and on K8s in parallel, then you might be interested into this flavor service binding K8s. That's a service binding mechanism that is compatible to the service binding IO specification. And here you get pointed via service binding root and var to a directory into which you find one directory per service binding. And below those directories, you find one file with your credentials. That's the standard way how you do it in Kubernetes. And you can opt into this behavior now also in Cloud Foundry. CF API performance and scaling, that's a recurring topic and important for our working group, especially for the CAPI part. In the CF API, Puma, a web server in Ruby, is meanwhile the default web server that is shipped, and we intend to remove the thin web server until end of this year, something like that. Puma actually delivers metrics the Prometheus way, that is via a metrics endpoint, and we had to learn the hard way that when you need metrics the most, they are gone, because your web server is overloaded and the metrics cannot be delivered. Well, it's not so hard to when you think about that, right? Therefore, we deployed a secondary Puma instance that is just available or just used for metrics and for a health status endpoint, and now you have metrics when you need them most. And we improved peak load resilience. The cloud controller VMs usually restart when a health endpoint is not available anymore. That means every time you overload the cloud controller, all the threads are occupied, the health endpoint is not available anymore, and your cloud controller restarts, which is probably not a good idea, because when one cloud controller restarts, there's more load on the remaining ones, which then also start to restart, and suddenly everything is down. If it's just a peak load because somebody had triggered let's say a deletion of 100 apps or something like that, it's often better to just try to stand this peak. And we do that now by using, as an experimental feature, you have to opt in a health status endpoint, and that one will delay a restart and keep the cloud controller running as long as it is still processing requests. That translates as for an end user that requests become slower and it takes longer time, but they are processed and you do not see 502s, 503s or something similar. Background jobs, I just want to refer to the previous talk. I list here again the improvements that were already mentioned by Pascal and Johannes. Blobs.delete jobs, that's maybe a fun fact to add. These blobs.delete jobs that led to the outage were actually created by deleting Docker apps. Now you may wonder, what? Docker apps? Blob? What has it to do? Nothing. It is just in vain. It was a bug in the cloud controller that just thought that it's a good idea to generate blobs.delete jobs when you delete Docker applications. Could be removed, and now this problem is gone. All the other things, dynamic job priorities, this removed select for updates was also implemented. Thread-based workers is a nice way to improve the usability of the VMs so that you can have a higher throughput for the worker VMs, and actually allowed at SAP with a very large number of very huge foundations to scale in the CC worker VMs by a factor of 2, save costs. I also want to recommend this talk that Johannes held at the CF Day in North America about optimizing Cloud Foundry API pizza job. It explains all the different optimizations, especially in the background job handling, in a very entertaining way. And finally, database query optimizations. It's service plans and instances again. It's actually every year where we optimize the queries for service plans and instances, because it's a super complex query, and you can see here results from the performance tests that we run on every CF deployment and CAPI release. So real good improvements, factor 2 to 3. CF API end of life, my favorite topic. 1 year ago on the CF Day in Karlsruhe, we announced this RFC number 32, where we laid out a end of life plan for the CF API v2, and clock is ticking. What should I say? What have we achieved so far? Meanwhile, CF deployment ships with CF API v2 disabled by default. Operators can still opt in, but you should know what you are doing and what kind of credit you are taking for this foundation, because end of 26, mid-end, so in 1 year, the next CF Day in Europe, we will probably talk about the removal of the CF API v2, and if I say we talk about the removal, I mean it, and it will be deleted, for sure. The Autoscaler switched the deployment model from a BOSH deployment to CF applications. It uses MTAR applications using these MultiApps deployment service, which makes the deployment of the Autoscaler simpler, cheaper, and nicer updates. I was asked to mention that the plan is to abandon and archive the Bosch deployment of the Autoscaler. So if you are deploying the Autoscaler, please follow up and check the new deployment models. And there is so much more. Just a small list. We support IPv6 application security groups. We have our share in the implementation of generic per route features. Cloud-native Buildpacks can meanwhile be uploaded as system Buildpacks to a foundation. User creation by org manager improves the user onboarding experience. There's a CF feature flag that allows, or the CF feature flag configuration can meanwhile be set as properties in the Bosch manifest. Big-end migration, if you run your foundation using Postgres, especially for the cloud controller database, then there was a risk that certain tables, audit events especially, run into a primary key ID overflow. That would have happened for one of our pretty old foundations in December this year. So it was a really complex and long migration that that will be applied to all foundations running on Postgres, only Postgres. The Canary deployment strategy now provides multiple steps for the rollout. There is more complete CF API v3 support in the Java client, and Ari also contributed to the cost-saving initiatives of the CF Foundation. We migrated everything over to short-lived bubble environments, used a cheaper region, and cleaned up orphaned resources, and could cut our CI costs also roughly by factor 2. All these improvements also are reflected in the CF CLI, so there are here some examples of new command options, of updates, of new commands that are available and have been developed over the last year. What's on the plate for the next year? One feature I want to talk about is service credential binding rotation. Cloud Foundry provides since quite some years with the v3 API a rolling update for applications, but there is actually no real waterproof solution for rotating service binding credentials. The only solution that actually works is a blue-green deployment, but that's not supported natively in CF, but you have to script it somehow. So it's an unfortunate situation. What we plan with this RFC number 40 is to support multiple bindings per application and service instance, so that you can implement a binding rotation that would work like you're shown with CFCLI commands. In the beginning, you have an application that is bound to a service. Then you can create a new binding for the same application, the same service with a strategy multiple, and you get a second binding with 2 sets of valid credentials. Still, the first one is used because the app was not yet restaged. Then you restage the application with strategy rolling, and now during the staging process, always the newest binding by created at timestamp gets actually used inside the container. That means during the update, the application switches from binding 1 to binding 2. That one is now used after the rolling update is finished, and finally you can clean up outdated service bindings and with that delete the first binding. The implementation in the API is underway. CFCLI commands will take a little bit longer. Then there are new RFCs that have been accepted. The first one is about how the cloud controller accesses the blob store. That is currently done by Ruby libraries called FOC. The disadvantage of these FOC libraries is that they are pretty out of maintenance. If we look at some infrastructures like Azure, then the underlying Ruby SDKs are actually already archived since years. So very bad situation. We plan here to switch over to a new implementation that is using the Bosch storage CLIs, something that was done in the foundational infrastructure for the same reason 2 years ago, and we will enhance them so that they implement all the necessary functionality required by the cloud controller, and then infrastructure by infrastructure switch over to this new implementation, and then get rid of a big bunch of unmaintained dependencies. That means also less CVEs in the future. There is an RFC to document the CF API in a machine-readable way with an open API spec, which in the long run should replace the Cloud Foundry API v3 handwritten documentation. In review, actually the first one is already accepted, is the stack handling improvements that Florian presented. So no need to talk about anymore, but that's something for the upcoming year. And finally, I promised, or I said that I will come back to Buildpacks and stacks, and that's something, yeah, what is the situation for CF Linux FS4, that is the current stack? There are no more Buildpack updates since beginning of July. Just think about it. What does it mean for your application? Over 3-4 months, your applications are collecting CVEs for the Java runtime, for Tomcat, for Python, for Node.js, for Nginx, etc., because there are just no updates anymore. And the reason here is that the build infrastructure is not yet available in the community, and let's say old experienced approvers left the area and do not contribute anymore. Any help here is really appreciated, and it's probably one of the most important topics that we get the delivery of Buildpacks and CF Linux FS4 stack updates shipping again, because otherwise all these promises that you heard about better security management are just void. They are useless. And your developers for your applications, they actually do not develop any more software, but they are now evaluating CVEs. Is that one of the 20 CVEs that you meanwhile have collected applicable for my application, for my use case or not? And that's something that actually Cloud Foundry promised to take this burden away from you, but at the moment it is not. And then there's an RFC to introduce a new CF Linux FS5 stack, the one based on Ubuntu 24.4. The goal is actually to make it available, let's say April or mid of 26, so that end users have 1 year time to migrate from FS4 to FS5. Back from the experience from FS3 to FS4, the FS4 stack was available with all the Buildpacks more or less at the same point where FS3 ran out of maintenance, and we wanted to avoid the situation. But I would not promise that at the moment, because we are lacking contributors here for the Buildpacks area. So one more time, if you want to contribute here, would be very much welcome. That's it.